welcome to Holme Fen, a nature reserve in Cambridgeshire in England. I first visited this area in the early 90s when I came here to do some scientific work with wildlife in the local farmland. And my local contact brought me here and showed me these posts either side of me, and I was gobsmacked. Here's why. When I was working here in my 20s, I was struck to see that many features on the map had names that matched those of the local farmers I was dealing with. Sloat Farm, Papworth's Bridge, Jackson's Covert. And then there was Eric, the farm worker who told me of being sent out as a boy to shovel coal into the steam engine that drained his grandfather's farm. The people farming and working here when I began my career were the great-great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the same folk who helped form the landscape we now see, where, in most parts of England, the origins of place names are usually lost in the mists of the past. Until the Middle Ages, the fens here in East Anglia were one big marshy area. There were settlements in higher spots and around the edge, where Fenlanders hunted wildfowl, fished for eels, and cut and exported reeds for thatching. There was some wet grazing land, but no serious arable farming as there is here today. The Romans had had a go at draining bits of the fenland, and had found that the peat that had formed over the centuries was fantastically fertile for growing crops. This knowledge hung on. Every gardener knows the value of peat. In 1630, a group of wealthy landowners led by the Earl of Bedford and known as the Gentlemen Adventurers hired the Dutch engineer Cornelius Vermuyden to begin work on draining the fens. By the end of the century, new channels, modestly named the Bedford River and the New Bedford River, carried water out of the fens quickly towards the Wash. As the fens drained, the peat dried out and shrank, leaving the newly dry land rather lower than the new drains and rivers. To drain the land further, it became necessary to pump water from the field drains up into the drainage channels. Windmills began to be built to do this, just as the Dutch had done. But as the peat shrank and the ground level fell further in the fens, it became harder and harder to pump the water up into the drains. In the mid-19th century, steam power arrived. The more powerful steam pumps could lift water higher, allowing more land to be drained more quickly, and they could work in any weather, even when the wind wasn't blowing. Victorian landowners were now able to drain the area that's now Holme Fen and the enormous Whittlesea Mere that lay to the north of it. So they did. One of those landowners was William Wells, who lived in Holme Village just round the corner. He saw that the ground level fell as the peat shrank, and in 1848, curious, had his engineer, John Lawrence, set up a wooden pile in the peat with its base embedded in the clay beneath, and the top cut off level with the ground. The clay was then 22 feet down beneath the peat. As Whittlesea Mere was drained, the peat duly shrank, and the top of the post began to emerge from the ground. In 1851, the wooden post was replaced with an iron one, said to have come from the Crystal Palace in London. The peat continued to shrink and the ground to fall around the post, so that it became unstable, and in 1957 metal guys had to be added to hold it up. The second post was added then too, with its top at the same level as the old one, but buried deeper into the now much lower ground. Out in the surrounding farmland, the owners of the huge areas of newly drained fen peat were doing well. The peat allowed amazing yields of hungry, high-value crops like potatoes and onions, which grew fast and big in the light, stone-free soil. Fortunes were quickly made. But now, in places, patches of clay are emerging through the peat. The bonanza of arable farming in the black gold peat soil is coming to an end as the peat just dwindles and blows away. Now, the Great Fen Project has bought most of the farms I worked on here in the 1990s and aims to return a huge area of what was then arable fen farmland into one great big nature reserve, which will be something like the fens were before the Gentlemen Adventurers, Lord Bedford, Vermuyden and William Wells started digging the drains and building the pumps. Of course, most of England has a rich history associated with it, and yet somehow here history seems closer, perhaps because the landscape as we see it today was engineered to be this way by the great-grandfathers of some of the people still living here and working here now. It's almost like you can reach out and touch the past. I hope you've enjoyed this one. See you in the next.